Olive Works here, coming to you once again after a very long break with One Piece chapter 1158 entitled Rocks versus Herald. So we have the 40th, yes, the 40th entry in the Yamato cover story that has been a buzz online for the past few days. So in this entry of the cover story, it says, Oni Child Yamato in the Holy Inari Shrine Pilgrimage, Volume 40. Here lies the Pirate of Justice. And that Pirate of Justice's name is Kozuki Moria. Now, there is only one Moria in One Piece that matters, and that is GeckoMoria. Supposedly, a guy on Reddit predicted 7 years ago that this would be the case and Moria would have some sort of tie to Wano. I am not going to say his name here, but I'll make sure I'll put his post here. It's amazing, but I gotta say, I'm going to give myself some credit too, because a while ago I had made a video stating that there had to be some significance with the names Gecko and Dracula. And I was talking about that extensively in that video. So now the truth seems to be that Moria is a relative of Kozuki Oden. This is an interesting development because if you didn't know, Moria is one of the few people in One Piece that was the captain of two differently named crews, because before Kaido's defeat, he ran the Gecko Pirates, but we don't know what name he went by at that time. And as people pointed out, he was carrying a katana when he fought Kaido, which is a weapon he never uses again. But then it's interesting that once he is defeated by Kaido, he is then known as GeckoMoria. So maybe he took the name Gecko from his old pirate crew that got decimated by Kaido and then just made that his epitaph moving forward. What's also interesting about this is that it has been speculated highly that the place Moria and Kaido were fighting was Ringo. So maybe after he lost the fight, he faked his death, right? So he had no more ties to the country, and then slowly became GeckoMoria over time. He grave robbed Ryuma's grave to get his corpse, which makes a lot of sense because he too, like Moria here, presumably was buried in Ringo. And of course, we have the whole theme of Moria coming back to life, which was joked about at the end of Marineford by Doflamingo when he suddenly disappeared when Doflamingo had Moria cornered with a bunch of pacifistas. So that could just be a running gag here. He died supposedly once against Kaido and remade himself. Then he supposedly died again at Marineford and then remade himself. And maybe after the escape from the pirate island, he will die again and rebirth himself metaphorically as, presumably, I hope, a member of Cross Guild. That would be really sick. But yeah, also another interesting thing in Marineford, because you don't see it in Thriller Bark, he technically is a practitioner of two-sword style because the scissor blades that he has on his person can detach from one another and become twin blades. So, like Kozuki Oden, he does use two-sword style, kinda, which is such a weird bit that I noticed personally, and it's so weird just how important Thriller Bark is, because Thriller Bark was the introduction to all the stuff we see in Wano. Like I've been saying for a long time, Moria is probably an Oni. All the Oni characters are attached to Wano, even though they all don't come from Wano, presumably. A lot of them end up being attached to Wano, like Who's Who and Black Maria and Yamato here, and then Kaido himself, who ruled Wano for a period of time. So in a way, Moria was our introduction to Onis, our introduction two ancient giants who appear a lot in Wano with the numbers. They're all ancient giants. And then he was our introduction to Samurai because, of course, he had Ryuma's corpse working for him while being possessed by Brook's shadow. So, yeah, it ties everything together. It really does. I don't know what else to say, dog. It really ties everything together. So, yeah, I could believe that Moria once upon a time was a part of the Kozuki clan, and perhaps he was just more well-traveled, unlike Odin at the start. Don't know, but I'm sure with this cover story presumably going further on, we're going to get more information, or this will be a lead to more information in the future when Moria shows back up in the narrative. Another thing that people have been pointing out, Otoko does look like Perona. I don't know if that means anything, but she does. But moving on with our chapter. We find out that the Roger pirates have now gained the knowledge that Shakuyaku is the proprietor of a legendary bar on Pirate Island, and that bar is a safe haven for all pirates to come to if they're specifically coming to visit her. The Roger pirates are excited about this and make their way to go visit her. However, we also find out in this conversation that Max Marks is actually the chef for the Roger pirates. We did not know this prior because we had a whole breakdown of various Roger pirates in SBS 112 and the positions that they played on the crew, but there was no mention of a chef, which caused a bit of an uproar in the community. So I'm glad we now have an actual chef on the Roger pirates. But this leads us into a conversation Figurlin Garling is having with the five elders at Mary Joie 40 years ago. So in the Room of Authority, Garling is talking about God Valley and how they didn't want to be a part of the world government, but they have some valuable resources. So he is urging them to set up a hunting game in order to take control of God Valley. This then leads us, of course, into the Kuma flashback, which happens later on the timeline. But this also pairs with the end of the chapter, in which we find out that Shamrock and Shanks were born on God Valley. This is crazy because we only knew that Shanks was from the West Blue, but of course, God Valley is in the West Blue. So that's pretty neat. And their mother has red hair, and her hair is even shaded in the same way that their hair is shaded in the manga. So yeah, it all ties together, but we do not know the name of their mother yet, nor what happens to her during the hunting game at God Valley between the Roger Pirates, the Rocks Pirates, and the Celestial Dragons, and the Holy Knights, and all of them. So we'll have to find that out. But continuing on, we now cut to outside of Shaki's bar on Pirate Island. She is praised for her terrible customer service because everyone just finds her so attractive, which is very funny. But this leads us into finding out that presumably Blackbeard, otherwise known as Marshall D. Teach, had been conceived at this point because Rox no longer swoons over Shaki, which is quite interesting. And then Stussy picks up that he must be seeing someone else. And Shaki also picks this up as well. So that's quite interesting. But then this leads us into Roger actually showing up and Roger and Rox butting heads. However, when they butt heads, a very interesting nickname is given to Rox by Roger, as Roger calls Rox Porcupine. And this exchange is very reminiscent of how Luffy and Buggy communicate with one another, because Luffy and Teach do not talk to each other like this. It is on-site aggression. There's no playful banter. There are no antics. There is, I'm going to kill you. And Teach is like, I want to see you try. There's never any playfulness when they meet. So this is very reminiscent of Buggy and Luffy. So I don't know if you want to make this a point, but it could be a point in the future. Just keep that in mind. And of course, the long line that we saw earlier was decimated by Roger and the boys, which is very funny. However, moving on and moving forward, Clarissa keeps trying to get Roger's attention. He doesn't care. He still likes Shaki, but Shaki only has love for Rayleigh, which is further proving my point that Rayleigh and Shockey are probably the parents of Boa Hancock and not Dracula Mihawk. I don't know why people keep saying that. Where do the eyes come from then? It makes no sense. But anyway, moving on. We cut to Elbath in the Realm of the Dead, in which Harold and Rox are going at it. Harold is convinced that the world government is the right path for Elbath and their people, because the people of Elbath have always been seen as monsters and tyrants. So he's really trying to change that. However, Rox is trying to convince him that the world government does not see Elbath and its people as citizens. It sees them as military units, as force, as might. But for whatever reason, Harold is not listening. And this probably led to the whole dehorning he goes through later on in life. I'm not sure. But in the way Rox is fighting Harold, it's so interesting that he has enough power to blow through Harold in such fantastic fashion. And I've seen people compare this to how the buggy balls back in the Orangetown arc blew through a city block, and it is very reminiscent of that. And I will say, explosions have always been associated with Bucky. I keep saying it. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I'm starting to believe again, even though we don't have any confirmed information on this, Rox had to have had a Dolfru, because this is just too surreal. It's too unique not to be a Dolfru, but we'll see. They talk about pride, but yeah, Harold is just not having it. Harold announces that he is the king of Elbath and cannot be associated with villains, especially villains who will be on the wrong side of history, which is technically correct. But that's how it ends. The friendship between Harold and Rox just ends there. And apparently, Rox is going to come back one day, and Loki is faithfully awaiting his arrival. And this starts a very funny but very touching relationship that starts to blossom between Loki and Harden's mother, Ida, as Loki starts to warm up to her, apparently, which is very nice. But that's the end of our chapter. I wonder, though, what will become of this information of Shanks and Shamrock being born on God Valley, because I don't think it's a coincidence that God Valley and Moria are mentioned in the same chapter. Like I said, I've done a video on God Valley possibly being turned into Thriller Bark, and we know Thriller Bark and God Valley were both from the West Blue, so I don't know, dog. I don't even know how that came to be, because we never get solid confirmation as to who built Thriller Bark, so that's always been weird. But it's always been my thought that the Crossgood organization would commandeer Thriller Bark when Moria pulls up, presumably in the future. But we'll have to wait and see. With that being said, no break next week, thank goodness. And that's our chapter. So thank you all for watching. Give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?